Hello, my name is Martie Whittekin. I'm a certified clinical nutritionist in the Dallas, Texas, USA area. I am the host of a long-running, nationally syndicated radio show about health. I'm the author of 2 books uh, about digestion, and I want to talk today about the connection between autoimmune diseases and digestion. So let's get started. Autoimmune disease is just a really big blanket kind of term that covers well over 100 different specific diseases. As the picture in the beginning showed, it can attack any tissue in the body. And so there are lots of different names: lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, multiple sclerosis, Hashimoto's, thyroiditis, and on and on and on. And what the doctors usually say, at least here, is there's no known cause and no known cure. Well, that leaves them with the option of just managing the symptoms, usually with medications, hoping to slow down the decline if possible, but no talk about curing it. That's because they haven't studied the gut, and especially leaky gut. Now, I'm going to go through a little kind of cartoon-like description of what leaky gut is for those of you that this might be a new topic. And what I'm showing on the screen are just three of the tiny cells that line the intestinal tract. And on top is a mucus layer. And a lot of times people that are into health freak out when they hear mucus because they think mucus is bad. Well, when it's coming out of your sinuses and clogging up your throat when you're trying to do a webinar, yes, not so good. But this thin mucus layer is protective, and when it gets eaten up by bad bacteria, then it exposes what's underneath. And you see these cells have a very bumpy top. Those little fingers are called villi, and on them are kind of a fuzz that's microvilli. And those are very important because food passes on the side where the mucus layer is and where the villi and microvilli are. And then the nutrients are absorbed through there. And the more surface area, the better. As you can imagine, if you flattened out all of those bumps and then all of the little tiny hair-like bumps on top of those, you'd cover, just even with 3 cells, you'd cover a square foot or something. So it's important to make sure that you have the surface area for the nutrients to be absorbed through. And of course, on the other side of the cells is where the blood circulates. And you'll notice that these cells are quite close together. There are no gaps between the cells, and that's called tight junctions. And that's accomplished by something. It's almost like little microscopic bungee cords that hold those cells together tightly. Well, what happens if, because of dysbiosis, the upsetting of the digestive microbiome, or by chemicals, yeast overgrowth, inflammation, and just malnutrition, ultimately what happens is we lose those microvilli and the villi, so we don't get as good absorption anymore. And worse yet, you now see that there are these gaps, and through those, because the little bungee cords got sloppy like an old rubber band, they don't work well anymore. And then that creates a passageway for little bits of food that aren't totally digested, like just a few molecules of wheat or something the person might be sensitive to. Toxins get through, pathogens, those can leak through this formerly tight barrier in the intestinal tract and get into the blood circulation. then they can go anywhere in the body. And food sensitivities often trace back to leaky gut. And so when those food molecules get into circulation, the immune system looks at this little hunk of dairy, little piece of lactose or casein, and says, I don't recognize that. And it activates it, and the immune cells go after it like it's a foreign invader. And the pathogens, when they get into the blood, obviously are going to activate the immune cells. And the toxins can damage cells, and a damaged cell then activates the immune system to go after it. So what happens next, especially with dysbiosis, is the immune cells can miss the target and attack healthy cells. They are shooting their weapons, the peroxide, the oxidative products that are as ammunition. It just kind of in the process of aiming at something they think is an invader, which may be an invader, they damage other cells. It's kind of what happens when you have a disease, a virus disease. The immune system gets so fired up that it creates the cytokine storms and damage healthy tissues and cause a lot of inflammation. And it's also a case that sometimes the molecular structure of a tissue looks kind of like one of the offenders and might even be targeted. The immune system gets a lot of its instructions, probably the most of them, from the bacteria in our intestinal tract. That's where 70 to 80% of our immune function comes from. And as we'll see later on, one of the things that our good bacteria make for us are signaling molecules to tell the immune system what to go after. So if they kind of lose their minds, and all bets are off. We'll go through a couple of causes of leaky gut. Antibiotics are prime suspects because, as you know, they kill our good bacteria, and that allows an overgrowth of things we don't want, particularly yeasts. And this yeast overgrowth just wreaks havoc with the lining of the intestinal tract, and they create, which yeast can be a whole nother seminar. The yeasts produce toxins called mycotoxins, and these are poisons that get into the blood circulation and go everywhere, and they cause just all manner of discomforts, from boggy brain to aching joints and rashes and so on. And that's from the yeast getting a foothold, because our good bacteria no longer can protect them. They've been killed off by the drugs. And antibiotics in their own right are toxic. I write about that in one of my books on probiotics. I do a whole chapter on antibiotics because they're overused and creating a lot of problems. And I just want to put in a quick note that I'll get back to later, but when I talk about how to take probiotics, people get this funny idea that, okay, you have antibiotics. If you take probiotics, it's going to interfere with the antibiotics. It doesn't work that way. The antibiotics interfere with the probiotics, but not the reverse. And then they think, well, I don't want to waste my probiotics. I'll wait until I'm finished with the antibiotics. That's not a good idea, because it allows this killing off of the good bacteria. You want to kind of hold down the fort. So I'll talk about that again later in the seminar. Here's a category of drugs. I don't know how it is in Estonia, but in the US, these are heartburn drugs are a massive business, billions and billions and billions, because when somebody has a pain in their midsection, they go to the doctor, and this is all the doctors know to do. I've talked to many of them that say, well, I know what we're doing is wrong. I don't know what else to do. And they don't, because medical school doesn't really talk about the microbiome and its importance. And this list are many of them, like the purple one, Nexium is the purple pill, is very popular here. I put in a couple that I found by search that may be more used in your area, but there are many, many of them, and their job is to stop stomach acid, and they do it very well. Now, here's the problem. Those drugs were approved to be safe only for 2 weeks. That's 2 to 4 weeks. And it's on the package, but nobody reads the little print. It says right there at the bottom, 3 14-day courses of treatment. That's what 42 tablets are. That's for a whole year. And people get on them and they stay on them for years at a time, every day. And you don't have to know very much about nutrition to know that that's going to be a problem. Here are some of the risks with these acid blockers, pretty serious stuff. And you got to start with the fact that they're kind of addictive. People become dependent on them. They did a study where they took subjects who did not have heartburn, had them take the acid blockers. Within a month, they couldn't do without them. So we're kind of on a uphill battle here, because when people stop taking them, they're sorry, oh no, I hurt again. And the doctor will even say, well, get back on them. But on my website, I have instructions, and I have it also in the books about how to get off of the drugs, but you don't just stop. You have to first solve the problem that caused the heartburn to begin with, and then you have to substitute things that aren't as damaging, and then slowly wean off of them. This is what's listed on the websites and in the package instructions that nobody reads. These are the so-called minor effects: back pain, erectile dysfunction. Ask a guy with that how minor he thinks it is. Hair loss, tremors, vision problems. But then this is where it gets really serious. The serious effects: you're more likely to die of pneumonia. And we just give the medical system a little more credit than they deserve, because for a long time, and hopefully I think they don't do it so much anymore, it was standard practice that if somebody's going to be in the hospital for 3 or 4 days, they give them acid blocking drugs so they shouldn't get heartburn from lying down. Unfortunately, in the hospitals where you're likely to come down with pneumonia, and this increases the likelihood that it'll kill you. Hip fracture, dementia, C. difficile, which you may be familiar with, is a condition usually caused in the hospital after having given the patient antibiotics, but it's a type of diarrhea that can't be stopped, and it just becomes lethal. Heart trouble, osteoporosis, and there's a whole lot more, because when you understand what the acid does, you can predict where there's going to be problems. And in my first book, I predicted problems that were going to arise, because I knew the nutrition of how the stomach acid worked, and that if we stopped it, there was going to be a big price to pay. First of all, that's our first line of defense. If you breathe in or swallow a pathogen, the mucus carries it down to the stomach. The plan was that stomach acid would dissolve it. But if you don't have stomach acid, which you should have 24 hours a day, and you won't have if you're taking like a proton pump inhibitor especially, that shuts down acid production for 24 hours a day. And so you are much more likely to have an infectious disease. We need acid to digest protein. That's the first stage, where it kind of unwraps the protein and makes it subject to the protein digesting enzymes and so on. And all the things we need protein for, not just building muscles, but hormones and enzymes and all kinds of body parts. We need stomach acid to signal the stomach to produce vitamins. One of the key ones I'll talk about later is vitamin B12 and vitamin K. And vitamin B12, I'll highlight a slide just because it's so important and so often looked. We need stomach acid to absorb minerals, all of the minerals. And the pH that's established in the stomach creates the pH for the whole rest of the intestinal tract. And so if you start out with the wrong one, you're going to create a less friendly environment for your good bacteria later on. I call them probiotics, whether they're in the gut or in a pill, because there's all the other terminology to describe our friendly bacteria is either a little juvenile, like friendly bacteria, or is way too technical. So I think probiotics serves a purpose. Finally, the FDA came out, and not until 2011, 10 years ago, with a warning about creating low serum magnesium levels and their text was, can result in serious adverse events. Well, let's look at a couple of those. Your magnesium helps keep your heartbeat regular and keeps you from having seizures. And it avoids sudden death, because if your heart stops beating, I know it's kind of a deal breaker. Now, this is the vitamin B12. I don't know. On mine, I'm moving the audience because it was blocking, but B12, we know about it for anemia, but it's very critical to prevent nerve damage and dementia. There's no telling how many seniors are in facilities for memory care that just simply need more B12. And they're probably on drugs that are damaging their B12. All the rest of those things, the bladder control, the shakiness and weakness, you're much more likely to have a fall if you're low in B12. So keeping the B12 up, especially for older people, is critical, but it's also critical for young people because of the development of the nervous system. Now, zinc is another thing. I mentioned the minerals. Well, I talked about magnesium, but zinc is also very critical for all of these functions: wound healing, our metabolism, immune function. And these days, you want to have plenty of zinc on board, because what it does, if it gets into the cells, it keeps the virus from replicating and taking over. And some of the drugs that have been found to be useful for treating COVID, what they do is help, they act as ionophores. I always say that one wrong, but they get the zinc to go into the cell. And if you don't have the zinc, then the drug isn't going to do you much good. And if your immune system isn't functioning very well because you're low in zinc, the vaccines don't even work very well because they depend on an immune reaction. So if acid is needed, it isn't the problem. What is the problem? It's that the acid is going someplace it doesn't belong, basically back up into the esophagus. And those drugs don't address that at all. In fact, the risk that you take with them is just kind of, it'd be silly if it wasn't so sad, because it doesn't fix the root cause, and it doesn't even keep the acid from getting up into the esophagus. And even weak acid, and if your acid production is very weak, you're still going to put some digestive juice into the stomach after you eat, and then if you lie down, it's going to go back up into the esophagus, and the drugs don't help with that. Yeah, what they say about is don't go to bed for a couple of hours after dinner or lie down on the couch. That's good advice, but it isn't enough. And I have found that anytime somebody is put on a lower carbohydrate diet, usually for cardiovascular reasons or weight loss, they say, oh, wait a minute, I don't have sleep apnea anymore. I don't have heartburn anymore. So I personally, I keep Dr. O'Hara's in the nightstand because even though I know I shouldn't do this, sometimes dessert just looks too good. I eat it. And then when I go to bed, I'm like, oh, that doesn't feel very good. But the Dr. O'Hara's fixes it. And I'll talk about that after a while. You have to fix the microbiome because so much of what tells your body how to operate, every bit of it kind of comes back to whether the microbes in your gut are doing their job, whether you've got the right diversity and the right numbers to control the body. And it really helps stop acid reflux and all of the different conditions that are based on that, whether it's Barrett's esophagitis, GERD, NERD, different names they give it. It's all stomach acid not staying where it belongs. I don't put this in here, but I have to even wonder if low vitamin D isn't one of the causes, because when you're low in vitamin D, you lose muscle strength. And that ring, the sphincter that keeps everything going south like it's supposed to, is a muscle. So what if it gets weak? I think in the end, we can't just say, well, I'm only going to work on this part of the body because it all works together, and it takes everything. It takes all the things we know to do well for health: the good rest, drinking water, getting sleep, eating nutritious food, taking care of your probiotics, all of those things to get the body to run right. And the reason that some people react differently to the same set of oopses is that they have different genetic makeup and they're in different environments, but just takes a lot of attention. There are alternatives, even papaya enzymes. And if you have to stop the acid because it's bad, instead of one of the drugs, you can just use a little baking soda in water. And some people do very well by taking a teaspoon of apple cider vinegar in a few ounces of water. And that kind of doesn't stand to reason. So why would you add another acid? But there are things in the apple cider vinegar that just help, and I'm not sure we know exactly why. And you have to wean off of the drugs slowly because the body will overcompensate. You've been telling it, don't make any acid, don't make any acid. And then when you kind of take the brakes off, it goes, wee, let's make a lot of acid. There is one other thing that those other rules don't directly apply to. And I've heard from so many people that, oh, the doctor said I have Barrett's or I have GERD because I have a hiatal hernia and I'll just have to deal with that the rest of my life. So here, take these acid blockers. But this is what it looks like. The stomach has protruded through the opening in the diaphragm muscle. And so it just kind of, things slosh back and forth and create trouble. But and the doctors will say, well, there's a surgery for this, but I don't recommend it because it doesn't always work, doesn't last, and it's very dangerous surgery, very risky. But there are a good chiropractor or a massage therapist or a rolfer. They can do with massage, they can manipulate the stomach back where it belongs so that it's all on the right side of the diaphragm. And I give you this, and I put it on my website, and it's in the books. There's Dr. Bob Martin has a self-help tab on his website with instructions about how to do it yourself. It's probably better to go once to a professional and then use the self-help to maintain it. But I don't like to see anybody get that surgery, but they don't want to have to suffer with hiatal hernia the rest of their life either. So I want to talk about how to use Dr. O'Hara's. And for a lot of conditions, like if you've really got dysbiosis, you've got a yeast overgrowth, you might want to start with a loading dose, and that's 5 capsules a day for 6 days. You just blow through a box. You want to kind of give the good guys a running start to build that up. And I don't do this for somebody that's very fragile and is very prone to what they call the Herxheimer reaction, where it's a healing crisis. You feel worse before you feel better. You can gradually build up to 5 a day and then taper off after that. Normally the instructions are 1 in the morning, 1 in the evening, and with other probiotics, and I think originally Dr. O'Hara said that too, you take it on an empty stomach. However, I don't think it matters much if you take it with food. And if what you do, I tell people, do whatever you can be consistent with, because the magic in Dr. O'Hara's is not so much the live bacteria, although that's important. It's the postbiotics, it's the things they've made, and we're going to get into that later, and they are not so sensitive to the stomach acid. This is why I put Dr. O'Hara's sleeve in my nightstand, is because if you're having heartburn right now, you don't want to wait for the capsule to get through the system, dissolve in the intestine, and make you healthier. You want relief right now. And you can get that by chewing 2 of them. You put them in your mouth, let them soften a little bit, and then chew them up. And the reason they work is not because the bacteria get busy reproducing and doing things. It's because the capsule is full of all of the hundreds of things that the bacteria have made while they've been fermenting for 3 years. And some of those are enzymes, fatty acids, whatever they are. Which ones, I don't know, but they go to work right away. And in fact, I know people who have had flat out food poisoning, and they took 10, 12, 20 of them. You can't overdose. The only side effect of overdosing with Dr. O'Hara's might be poverty, because you're going to burn through them so fast. But it's just great stuff, and I think we should be prepared and have them with us, especially when you travel. If you put it in your, because it doesn't have to be refrigerated, you can have it in your briefcase, you can have it in your dopp kit, you can have it in your suitcase. Just don't go anywhere without it. Now, with antibiotics, I said you don't want to wait until you're finished with the antibiotic. You just don't want to take them at the same time of day. You take them concurrently on the calendar, but not on the clock. 2 hours probably is enough between taking the drug and the probiotic. And instead of backing off, I would probably take extra, because you're now making it harder. And we want to feed our good bacteria. What they like are fibrous foods. And that means vegetables, fruits, whole grains. That's what they live on. They adapt, and different strains will adapt and live on whatever you continuously feed them, but it has to be real food. They don't like sugar, they don't like chemicals, they don't like preservatives for obvious reasons. Preservatives are put in food to kill bacteria, so you want to feed them well. And try not to kill them off. No matter how good your probiotic is, you can be taking Dr. O'Hara's, which I believe is clearly the best in the world. But if you're constantly taking medications, almost all of them medications, not just antibiotics, almost all of them are hard on your good bacteria. If you drink too much alcohol, eat foods that have pesticides on them, you smoke, you're sedentary, everything that you do that's hard on your body is hard on your bacteria. So try to give them a break. Now, I thought it might be a good idea to tell you why I recommend Dr. O'Hara's. I'm sure that you have a lot of the same opinions, but I've been studying this for 20 years, and in my books, I started with a clean slate and an open mind. I looked at in the book on probiotics, the one that's been translated into Estonian, I looked at 1,000 studies to see what the common denominators were. And at the end of all that research, I came back to seeing why Dr. Here's works so well, because it's clearly different. And the results are the main thing. I used it with clients. I don't see clients anymore. I'm more into the education and publicizing what we need to do about health. But I would see results that I didn't see with any other product. So that's the key thing. But all you have to do is look at it and realize it's not a freeze-dried white powder. And the way those products are made, they culture, and this is virtually all of the other probiotics. They have different amounts, different combinations of strains, but they culture them like over a day or two at the most, like making yogurt. And then they separate them from their food supply. They break up the colonies, they put them in a centrifuge and spin them down and then freeze dry them. That's very hard on the organisms. And so a high percentage of them don't survive. But even the ones that survive, they don't do anything until you swallow them. They get into the intestinal tract. They get something good to eat. And if what you had was just some French fries, they're not going to be happy. They aren't going to grow. And they have to reproduce and start making postbiotics. Obviously, Dr. O'Hara's is way ahead on that because they already have it. I like the balance of strains. I like the research behind the 12 strains they use. They're very complementary in what they do. They do different things. So the combination of it covers a lot of territory. And I particularly like TH10. This is an example. This slide on the left is a petri dish with bacteria in it, where they put a dot in the middle of antibiotics. This is one with Dr. O'Hara's with the TH10 in the middle, and you can see it much more. The bacteria were salmonella, so the food poisoning bacteria. It much more effectively cleared an area and cleared a bigger area. That's how potent it is. This is the biggest reason, because the fermentation process and the way that the Dr. O'Hara's people take the bacteria and feed them all these wonderful plants, the organic fruits and vegetables, wild-crafted herbs, seaweeds, all of those kinds of things. That gives the bacteria what they need to make postbiotics, which I'll get into in a little greater depth. But other products don't have that. And I went to Japan. I saw how they made Dr. O'Hara's, and it's fascinating. They have them in these big blue vats, and they are feeding them and they're aerating. They put this like a giant mixer in to make sure that there's good aeration. And this was kind of funny. I'm walking through and there's classical music playing, and I'm thinking, well, that's nice. And I said something to the guide. I said, so nice that you play classical music for the employees. They looked at me like I was adult. Said, that's for the bacteria. They're so sensitive to the bacteria's needs. They even want the right vibrations there. And they say with the classical music, they thrive better. So, in 3 to 5 years of fermentation, I said there will never be a competitor, a real competitor in the United States, because we don't have that kind of attention span. We want it done next week. Now the postbiotics, the first one I know to use that term when I wrote the first book, and I think that was back in 2009, because nobody was looking at that. I didn't see that when I looked at the research, but here's what it is. It's everything that they create, all kinds of metabolites. We know that there's probably 500 identified so far in Dr. O'Hara's, but it's also their cell walls and their DNA. So even bacteria that have done their thing and they have died, what's left of them, their cell walls and their DNA, still carry messages that are effective. They've done studies where they purposely killed some of the Dr. O'Hara strains with heat, and they still have a very good effect. So it's all about messaging and signaling. These are the categories of postbiotics. Amino acids, they're taking the protein that's fed to them and turning it into amino acids. And I love this. They make selective antibiotics, selective antiviral, selective antiparasitic. They only go after the bad guys. You don't get that benefit with an antibiotic drug. It's like a flamethrower. It just goes after everything. But these antimicrobials that are made by the bacteria, they know what they're going for. They're competing for the same territory. And so they don't want to kill off their family and neighbors. They want to get rid of the invaders. They make anti-tumor substances, antioxidants, and enzymes. And some of those metabolites, there may be totally hundreds of thousands after the bacteria get in and make home. What they make depends on what you feed them. And they actually make more of the neurotransmitter melatonin, which you may know is valued for jet lag and for getting to sleep at night. 4 times more is made in the gut than in the pineal gland in the brain. They make nitric oxide, which is important for blood pressure. And I just was at a seminar this week on one of the things, 2 hours worth of what nitric oxide does. So if it only did that one thing, it would be very good, but it does a lot of other things. I talked about vitamin B12. The stomach has a role, but so do the friendly bacteria. And vitamin K2, which needs a better press agent, because what it does is it helps calcium go into the bones instead of clogging up the arteries and hardening the arteries. Very important vitamin. And if you're taking a lot of vitamin D in hopes of preventing COVID, which is vitamin K2. And the fibers that the bacteria digest make organic acids. And these short chain fatty acids, a lot of them are very nourishing to the lining, and they energize the lining of the intestinal tract. And they act as signaling molecules. And that sends messages all over the body for what we should be doing. This is a good example, I think. There's a substance, urothalin A, and it's from pomegranate. And the people that make pomegranate products knew that it was beneficial. They dug deeper and found out that this substance is why it did these things. The animals lived 50% longer, and it improved their mobility, their exercise capability, and stopped the age-related muscle function decline. All of these are things that we would like to have. But what they also found is that if they gave the pomegranate to an organism, a mouse or whatever, that had a sterile gut, then they didn't get this, because the urothalin A only came about when the bacteria made a metabolite from the pomegranate. So that turns out that this urothalin A is a postbiotic. And this is why I really believe that anybody that's on a supplement program should make Dr. O'Hara's the foundation, because it will get the most out of all the other nutrients. If you're taking wheatgrass powder or whatever you're getting, you're going to get more out of it if you have the right bacteria in place to digest it and turn it into the postbiotics, because the postbiotics are what actually does the heavy lifting. Now, one question that I get a lot is, CFUs, colony forming units. There is not a big number on the package for Dr. O'Hara's. Doesn't bother me a bit because all of these others that say, oh, we have 10 billion, we have 40 billion, makes you wonder, well, what is the right number? Is there a magic number of colony forming units? And here is a magic number. That's it. I can't say it's 28 gazillion. It's way beyond even government size numbers. And that number is what you get if you put 100 bacteria in the right environment for 24 hours, because they double their numbers every 30 minutes. So I just did that on an Excel spreadsheet and was astounded at how many that is. So what that means, it's less important that you get some freeze-dried bacteria that claims to have 40 billion. What you want is proven strains that you know have had good research done on them. Make a good home for them by not doing these bad things with the toxins, and feed them well. And then what you get, because Dr. O'Hara's has already been fermenting for 3 years and eating these right foods, it's probably well beyond billions and trillions into septillions of microbes, because you still have their DNA and their cell walls and the things that they've made. So you're getting the benefit of way more than billions. Again, nothing else like it. I have a good bit more information on my website, a section of the library on digestion. And I have 2 books on digestion. One probably be a lot easier for you. The other one, still a bestseller because it's such a big problem. And I appreciate your time. I hope you got something